Well, thanks for doing this, Congressman.
Absolutely.
You are a veteran on the Energy and Commerce Committee in the House. You're now chairman of the Energy Subcommittee. So I'm really curious how you're grappling with this issue of rising energy demand from AI and data centers and manufacturing, and what that means for the power grid in the country. And to start off, I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about how you see the role of Congress and your legislative priorities on this issue. What do you hope to accomplish this session in order to grow out the power grid in this country?
Well, in the last Congress, and first, as you mentioned, being on the Energy and Commerce Committee, you can't be on a better committee in Congress. We always tell everybody else, all the other committees, that we are the best committee. We have the broadest jurisdiction, and when you look at, though, on the energy side, in the last Congress, everybody that came before us in the subcommittee, I asked the same question. Do we have to have more power or less power in this country? And no matter where they were from and what they represented or what agency they were with, they all said the same thing. We have to have more power. And when you look at the power usage that they had predicted from several years ago, but it is kind of almost like flattened out in some cases, but because of what we're seeing with the data centers coming online, that those graphs just go shooting straight up. And so when you're thinking about 4.5% to 6% to 8% more power usage just from the data centers coming online this year alone, and then it keeps going up exponentially from there, we've got to have more power. And because we got to have it. And you think then it's not just creating the power, but it's also you're going to have a modernization of the grid to get it from point A to point B.
Mm-hmm. So what does that mean in terms of legislative priorities? I mean, the grid is a big, complicated machine. There's overlapping jurisdictions between federal and state authorities. Do you have kind of legislation in mind? Do you have things that you want to pursue as chairman of the Energy Subcommittee? How do you see that?
Well, there's multiple, because again, one of the great things about sitting on the Energy and Commerce Committee is that we're looking over the horizon 5 to 10 plus years. All the innovators, the entrepreneurs that are coming in that have these great ideas and how we can advance things. So we have to make sure we get the right laws in place there. But one of the areas we have to always talk about right off the bat is about permitting. And permitting is going to be a huge issue because when we see projects that might languish out there for 7, 8, 9 years, we just can't have that continue. So we've got to work with our friends, especially on the Natural Resources Committee, because we have overlapping jurisdiction there. But permitting is one of the top things we're going to be talking about because we've got to get it out there. We have situations out there where you're almost at the end of the entire time frame, and somebody at the very last minute files another lawsuit, and it just throws things into turmoil. And when you look around the world, we do have to move things. And so I'm looking at getting more energy out there. So just not from the permitting side, if you think just on the electric grid or pipelines and things like that, but then on the other area, what are the other technologies out there we have to be talking about today? And we're blessed in that we lead the world in natural gas production. When years back we were told we had no natural gas, and same with oil, that we were told that we didn't have any more oil, and we can outproduce Russia or Saudi Arabia on any given day. And so when you look at what we have to do there, that also think about on the nuclear side, and I think that nuclear is going to be playing a huge role in the future. So it's everything from your traditional nuclear plants down to your small modular reactors, and then how are you going to fuel them? And so that's the other steps. The French have been recycling their spent nuclear rods for decades. The United States during the Carter administration in 1977 stopped it. So I've been told we have enough energy just from those spent rods we have around the country for 100 years of fuel. So there's never going to be any kind of lack of things that we need to be doing in the subcommittee, but it's going to be advancing, getting more energy out there because that demand is increasing, not decreasing.
Mm-hmm. I want to come back to nuclear, but on the topic of permitting reform, there were conversations happening in the final days of last session. A deal fell apart at the last minute. What do you think is the path to getting permitting reform done in this session of Congress? And can some of those disagreements over transmission lines and what to do with NEPA and some of these other regulatory environmental review laws Can some of those agreements be overcome? Are those conversations happening right now?
Well, I'm a firm believer that the best way you work a piece of legislation is to get everybody in the room. And that's, as when I was in the Ohio legislature years ago, when somebody would testify before us, we had usually three hearings. We had a pro hearing, a con hearing, and an interested party. I like to get all three in the room at one time. And it's really important because I believe that everybody out there knows we've got to get something done. And so you always have to start with this. I'm never going to get 100% of what I want, and you're never going to get 100% what you want, but don't tell me how we're not going to do it. Tell me how we're going to get this thing accomplished, because that's what I think we're going to have to do, because, as we were talking before we came out today, we're 1/6 through this year already. And so that scares me, because time is of the essence around here, and so it's getting everybody onto the subject and moving it as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we're closely watching what's going on in budget reconciliation. You all had a long day, a long night yesterday. There's a budget resolution that passed the House, and it calls for $880 billion in cuts from the Energy and Commerce Committee. Now, there's been a lot of focus on the healthcare aspect of that, on Medicaid, but how much of that do you expect will come from energy, from IRA or other types of
Well, when you look at what we're tasked with that 880, so there's the healthcare side, because again, our all-encompassing committee. In the last Congress, when I chaired the Communications and Technology, one of the big issues there was that we're going into another year without having spectrum authority. And so if you look how you can get that spectrum out there, usually CBO scores too low there, but the score we're getting right now is around, in one case, about $74 billion just on spectrum auction, and I think that can go even higher than that, so that'll help on that side. On the energy side, you're not going to have as big on that, I don't think, because of the Biden administration. Starting around Labor Day last year, was pushing a lot of money out the door. So if you think about clawback and certain things, there's not as much there as that some people had anticipated. Mm-hmm. So we'll do our work, but a lot of our work is going to be also moving the economy forward, especially on the energy side with other legislation. Besides what we're tasked with on the reconciliation side.
Gotcha. So would you say a lot of the energy funding is largely off the table at this point, just by virtue of it being out and in the districts?
Because again, the dollars had been appropriated, and so it was a question: had they been encumbered and expended? And a lot of that has been. CBO had to come back to us. There's a little bit more there. First, people thought we were here, then we were down here, and we might settle a little higher than where we thought at the low end. But there'll be some dollars out there, but it won't be getting us as much as that maybe 6 months ago people thought was there.
Are there Inflation Reduction Act tax credits that you're hoping will stay in place? Are there any that you're defending because you're hearing from folks in your district that they're getting those and they're beneficial in creating jobs?
Well, we've heard across the industry out there on the energy sector, what might be helpful, what's not being helpful, and so I think what the speaker said, I think is very, very informative and also instructive to us of where we're going. Is that we're not going to use a sledgehammer here. That he said we're going to use a scalpel. So those that are working and doing what they're supposed to, those could be over on this side. Things that aren't or could be over on this side. So now that we're starting to get into the actual reconciliation part of this, now that we finally have that budget accomplished and we get all of our budget instructions, then we can move on from there then.
Gotcha. I mean, at what point are you in assessing which credits
would
stay or go? Is that just starting now?
It's on the early stage, but we've had a lot of discussions that have been going on with across the entire industry out there. So, but as I said, it'll be a scalpel approach, and then we're not just going to come with a heavy sledgehammer.
Got it. There has been a lot of concern, especially at the Energy Department, that the Department of Government Efficiency, led by Elon Musk, is taking more of a sledgehammer approach to funding and to layoffs at the Energy Department. A lot of those programs, of course, deal with things that, like long-duration energy storage, bringing a nuclear power plant back online, supporting grid technologies. Do you want to see those programs stay, or are you concerned that that funding, even after the funding pause with the layoffs, that those will be neutered and won't be able to help kind of the energy dominance strategy that you're talking about?
This is a great thing. Our role is on the legislative side, especially on. I'm a firm believer in committee. In committee is having those hearings and really bringing these things out. What we have to do. Again, on the nuclear side, on the small modulars, we've got to move there. We've got a couple of nuclear plants they're talking about wanting to bring back online. We can bring those back online, bring that power source back up as soon as possible. So it's going to be working with the administration, and because again, it's hard to go anywhere and not hear the word that we've got to have more power, and it's just absolutely essential we get that done. So I want to work with the administration, and we want to work across the aisle with our Democrat friends. But we had our first subcommittee hearing a couple weeks ago. It brought to the forefront one thing. It's just everybody knows we've got to have more power, and I haven't heard anybody out there say no, we don't have to have it, because it's just the amount of power usage in the technological changes that are happening in the data centers. Last week being a work week, I have 2 data centers going up in my district right now, 5 miles from where I live, and about 80 miles to my west. And you look at the technology. I was at one of our large corporations that's in my district that are developing fluids to be able to use to cool at the data centers. So all these things are happening out there. So one of the things, as I said, when you sit on the dais, we want to make sure that we're getting the right laws in place and the regulations that follow, because we don't want to hinder these entrepreneurs and innovators from doing what they do in this country.
Gotcha. I mean, a lot of the funding was appropriated, authorized by Congress already. So Congress passed the law, Department of Energy set up these programs, and they're trying to get the money out the door. I mean, are you having any conversations with the Trump administration or the Energy Department leadership on what the future of those programs look like? Because there are a lot of companies that are submitting invoices, for example, to the Energy Department and expecting that payment. So at what point does that become a problem?
It's kind of goes across the line. We're hearing from, not just on the energy side, but, villages or cities out there that have water line, sewer line projects and things like that. So all these things you got to bring up, say, before you do something, did you consider this? But having served on the budget committee years ago, one of the things that I've always been concerned with, and especially what we were doing yesterday on the floor, we're going to pay about $1 trillion just to pay interest on the debt. And so when that becomes the number 2 driver behind Social Security, that we got to take all these things into consideration. I check 2 things out early in the morning when I get up. Number 1 is what West Texas Intermediate's at every day, and also what the 10-year Treasury is. In the last week and a half, we've seen Treasuries starting to come down, but that's the interest that the federal government's paying out there. So a lot, you might say, well, something that might be out there that we could be having funding for. Well, we might not have it because we're going to use that money to have to pay interest on a debt.
Gotcha. Well, I do want to come back to nuclear power, and with data centers partnering with nuclear companies, there's been a lot of hype about a nuclear renaissance. Last session, Congress passed the ADVANCE Act by an overwhelming majority. I'm curious, what you think Congress might do this session. What more is there to do to support nuclear power?
Well, at first, what we worked on in the last Congress, first of all, you got to have the fuel, and that's important on the uranium side. But it's also important that we look at, how fast can we get small modulars? The predictions I've heard 6, 7, 8 years before you might have something out there. But I think that's important for us to be working on in committee and in Congress to get these things passed, because in some cases that you've got some of the large data centers want to have their power behind the meter. And so, if that starts happening, what's that going to look like? But then again, it could be on the small modular side, or it could be natural gas lines you're going to have coming in to help power. So it's, I just envision right now, we've got to look, and we already pretty much have had the hearings of how much more power we're going to have. And you know, the one things that we did back in 2008 on our side of the aisle was when we came up with our all-above energy strategy, it was very simple. We said, look, we have all of these different power sources out there. If you think of all of what we're using today, and then you think about all on the intermittent side. But the one thing we always said was we don't want to have the federal government picking the winners and losers out there. It's what's best for an area and what can be done. But when I talk to power companies out there today, they look at one thing: how much more power can get in that grid, because there's such an absolute high demand for it going on.
Gotcha. Well, we're out of time. I do want to end on one fun thing as well. You told me a few weeks ago you get up at 4:30 in the morning and work out. Is that true?
Oh, yeah, I hate to admit that.
How? And also, do you have a favorite workout routine that you do to get you all jazzed and ready to go?
I ride bike outdoors, and I'm very happy that it's warmed up a little bit, because 7 below zero is not fun.
In northern Ohio, too, yeah. Well, Congressman, we're out of time, so we'll leave it there for now.
Well, thanks
so much for taking the time.
Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Yep, you too.